Hi, and welcome to Coral Vision's Legislative Preview Show. I'm Jennifer Hemmingsen, the opinion editor for the Gazette, and with me today is Senator Bob Dvorsky. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. The
Sure.
legislative session kicked off this week with a bunch of speeches and also a hint of what's going to come for the session. Can you tell us your first impressions about how things are going to go for you this year?
Sure. Because there's a lot of sort of ceremony the first week. We have the governor came in with the State of the State address, and then the Chief Justice with the State of the Judiciary address. And then in a couple weeks, I think we have the State of the National Guard with the Adjutant General, also General Orr. So that, I think, is in 2 weeks. But the governor rolled out, slowly kind of rolling out his budget. He had sort of some ideas what it was in the speech, and then he handed out some information about the budget. But now I think at the end of this week, we're finally able to get the detail, I guess, of the budget. So we need to start looking at that closer and see where that's at. So.
And for our viewers who maybe aren't as familiar with the legislative process, what does the governor's budget, what role does that play in how your work unfolds?
Well, that's a very good question. It's one of those things that for whatever reason, I think people in civics class or something, they always forget how that works in Des Moines, because they sort of assume the governor, puts out this budget, and then that's what we have to do is his budget. The legislature determines the budget. So the governor puts out his budget, but we determine what the numbers are in the budget. So
the governor's budget is like a suggestion, or an opening volley.
It's a suggestion, and in the past, we've had even 3 different budgets. We've had because we had split control. We had the Senate Democrats in charge of the Senate and the House Republicans in charge of the House. So at one time we would have the governor's budget, the House Republican budget, and the Senate Democrats budget. Now the last, I think, 2 sessions, I believe, we've done a joint budget with the House Republicans.
And will you do that again this time?
Well, we've been talking about it. I'm not sure if we will or not. We probably will in the end, but I don't know that for certain. But we're looking at that. And trying to see. So the governor kind of works with the House Republicans and the Senate Democrats to promote his budget, but it ends up being really the legislature makes the decision on the spending. But I guess you could ask 9 out of 10 people on the street who determines the budget, and they think the governor does. And he doesn't. We do. So that's our job.
And as chair of appropriations, that specifically is your job.
Specifically my job, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I've heard people say, budgets are policy. We can talk as much
Sure.
as we want about transportation,
Sure.
about education, but it all comes down to the numbers in the budget. That really determines what we can do. So talk a little bit about the governor's budget, about your priorities, and about how you want to get some of these bigger issues taken care of that people have been talking about.
Okay.
Maybe let's start with transportation.
Okay.
Because we haven't had a lot of details about transportation yet. Transportation infrastructure, sorry.
Right, transportation infrastructure. We're trying to see what we can come up with that. There's obviously a need out there that I think, I'm not sure this is still correct, but at one time Iowa had the second most roads in the United States, mileage of roads. We were behind Texas, I think.
Huh.
But so we have to maintain all those roads and all those bridges, and I think we have like the 3rd most bridges in the United States or something per state. I mean, it's amazing for a small state like this. So we really have a lot of transportation infrastructure to maintain. And what has happened is because of the cutbacks at the federal level, we're going to have a huge hole coming up in a couple of years where we need to really do something here locally, statewide, to deal with that situation. So we've been talking about this for a couple of years, maybe 3 years, to try and see about raising the fuel tax or what alternatives or a combination of that to try and see if we can move that forward.
And there's been a ton of study on this issue.
Sure.
So you've got a lot of information.
It's been sort of studied to death.
It kind of has been studied to death.
What it really needs is some political will, because the situation is, the governor's been sort of promoting it, but not, I wouldn't call it really good leadership. I'd call it sort of leading from the back, as they say.
I've heard a lot of people say that somebody should do something.
Right. He says he says we should have something done, but he says he won't dictate it because the legislature should do that. Well, there ought to be something out there that he's supportive of. So
you would like to
anyway.
see Branstad say
Well, I
sort
could
of what
see-
he would or
he-
wouldn't,
he
because
did
ultimately
say-
it's going to come up to his.
Yeah, he did state in
end.
the state that he wanted some transportation infrastructure done, so that was helpful, I think. So
Okay.
now it's up to us to look at it. I actually happen to be on Transportation Committee. I've moved up to vice chair on that committee now. So anyway, so I am on the Senate Transportation Committee, and we are looking at the fuel tax. One of the things that I hope people understand is the fuel tax in Iowa is constitutionally protected. You can only use that for, to put into roads and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that is constitutionally protected, and we haven't raised it since 1989. I guess unfortunately I was in the Iowa House at that time. That's a long time ago. But there's tremendous needs out there. But some people, I know I've heard from people say they're concerned you pass that, use the money for something else. You can't. It's constitutionally protected. And also if we do the fuel tax, then about 40% of that comes from out-of-state people who drive through the state to
So as opposed to a
use it.
registration fee or something like that, where
And we
only
may
the
look at all
islands-
those others also. The DOT did a study last year to look at alternatives, and they had several alternatives there. A lot of them weren't politically saleable, but some of them might be. So I think we're going to try and look at the fuel tax and see, because that is the one that's in place and the system, and it works.
Do you think there's any chance of having, whatever the solution looks like, having it be something that auto-refreshes, so we're not in this situation in 30 years?
Yeah, that's what they were trying to look at, CPI or something. And then they were talking about maybe having a cap. It can't go over like 1.5% or something like that.
Okay.
And if it dropped, it dropped. So then the tax would drop. So I think there's a lot of factors coming together here with it. I think people expect us to do something on this.
So you think it's going to get done this
So
time?
I would hope it would get done. Now, the political question is always, you don't want somebody to send out a postcard saying you voted for the gas tax and I'm running against you and I didn't, or I don't support it. So they want to make sure that you have probably about half of each caucus voting for it. The Senate, we need 26 votes to pass.
Everybody's implicated in actually fixing the state's roads.
Yeah, so hopefully, since we need 26 votes, there'll be 13 from each caucus. But I don't know if or close to that anyway. So that's what we need to do. And in the House, you need 51. So you would have whatever that number is, 25. 26 of one of them. So we're slowly working through that. But I think I would hope there's enough momentum to get something done on that.
Great. Let's talk about another hot button issue. The Regent's proposed funding change to the funding formula for higher education. There are some people who think it's a great idea. There's some people who hate it. Where do you personally fall on the issue, and what do you think is going to happen this session?
Well, I think it's ill-conceived, and I think it's going to really split sort of the regions working together, and it's going to split the regions from the private colleges and community colleges in the state. One of the things, the effect it will have, and I didn't think about this, some other people came up with this idea that if we do this, it's going to raise tuition everywhere, because there's going to be an arms race to get more students at the regions. Then they'll take, there's only X amount of students graduating from Iowa high schools. I think it's something like 26,000 each year, and it's dropping. And so then they'll take students who would have gone to private colleges or community colleges. So the community colleges, private colleges have to raise their tuition. And then if the universities, if they have more students, they may have to raise their tuition. So everybody, probably the tuition's going to go up because of this. And over all these several years, the regions have worked together. It's always been University of Northern Iowa, Iowa State University, and University of Iowa working together with a proposals to move that forward, as well as their capital needs. They've always, the last several years, had like one capital project from UNI, one from Iowa State, and one from University of Iowa. So this puts a wedge in the middle of that also.
So you think they'll be seeing each other as competitors rather than...
Well, yeah, that's what this thing does. So I don't know. It's supposed to be performance-based, and the way it's set up, I don't think it really is. It just measures enrollment. It doesn't measure graduation.
So there's maybe a 10% is
There's a couple
underperformance and
ones. The other thing
60%
is it
enrollment?
undervalues graduate and professional
Okay.
programs, and that's where the University of Iowa has a lot. You know, you have a law school, a medical school, and pharmacy and nursing and all those, medicine. I think they're undervalued in their proposals. So I think they really need to go back to the drawing board. I think it's such a substantial change to all higher education in the state, not just the regents. I don't think they considered private colleges or community colleges at all when they did that. And I think the best thing we can do is try and come up with some sort of a solution for fiscal 16 in funding UNI, Iowa State, University of Iowa. And obviously we know that UNI has a problem in that they have so many Iowa students, over 90% are Iowa students. They don't get that out-of-state tuition, that the out-of-state tuition covers their cost and maybe a little bit more. That we might need to put a little extra into UNI and maybe some extra at Iowa State because of their enormous growth in enrollment. So, but just to do that to get through 2016, and then I would like to see a task force or an interim that has everybody involved in higher education in Iowa, the privates, the community colleges, as well as the regents.
Okay.
And maybe somebody from K through 12 also to study that to see what we really do need to do, you know, because it has
sort of
such
treat
an
the
enormous
educational system.
Yeah, and that is one of the things, you know, the regents submitted this based on the public universities, which is sort of their job, but then it's to the legislature, and our job is to look at all higher education across the state, not just the public universities.
So for people who think that this is the legislature maybe getting too deep into regents' business, what would your answer be then?
The regents aren't the regents aren't a separate branch of state government. They still have to deal with the legislature like anyone else. So there's this suggestion, and it's actually done through the appropriation process. So, and that's another problem with this, and this is sort of inside baseball, but the regents submitted their budget, a total change on how you do the formula and everything. They use the existing format that really doesn't work.
The existing format being the historic percentage
Yeah,
based?
base plus.
Okay.
So they submitted that, and then they submitted something on top of that. So it really, I don't think technically that's really going to work. If
Do you
they
think that
wanted
the
to
old
change
system
that.
is sufficient? I don't mean to interrupt, but so the old system was everybody got a cut,
Right.
and that cut increased across the board
Right.
every year.
Every time we increased it, right?
Is it okay to go back to that, or do we need something different?
Well, I think they probably need something different. I don't. I think it certainly doesn't hurt to look at that every several years and see if there's a better system. But I don't think what they propose makes sense. So,
Okay.
so if we sort of use this modified current system and then move forward with the task force and make some recommendations and move forward on that. So.
Okay.
And the governor didn't recommend what the regents asked for, so he was. It's going to be interesting how all that.
The dollar
Works
amount or
out.
the model?
Well, I haven't seen the detail if he actually has the model in there or not.
Okay.
I don't know that, but it wasn't even close on the dollar amount. So
Okay.
it will be quite interesting. That's the other problem. It's a very tough budget, and if you're going to try and backfill some of the regions, that's going to be tough because we probably don't have the funds to do that.
And it's tough not because the state is broke, but because
No.
you got a lot of bills coming due.
Right.
Can you explain that a little bit for?
Right, we
for
have
your
about,
crowd?
I think it's 4.9% increase in revenues coming in, which is, you know, a robust amount of revenues coming in. But we've had all these commitments in 2013 where we did the commercial property tax break, where we're doing a commercial property tax break across the state and some other tax breaks. But those have to be backfilled to the cities and counties so they're able still to provide services. So that's a big number. And then we're doing educational reform, that's also a big number. So the teacher leadership things. So those two combined, and then the other big one is Medicaid. I'm sorry, Medicaid. Medicaid, that's going up a lot. That one we're sort of the victim of our own success, where the unemployment rate in Iowa is lower than a lot of other states, and they sort of judge that on what the federal share is then. So the federal share is going down. It was over 60%, and now it's going down to about 50, eventually down to like 54. So each one of those, we have to make that up.
Let's talk a little bit more about education and education reform. You mentioned the teacher leadership program incentives coming. Is this the first school year that
This-
those are active?
This is the first school. There are some. It's going to take 3 years to implement it, and I think the first year, some of them are already moving forward on it now. This will
Okay.
be the second year of districts getting into that.
Okay. And this is also the kindergarten class this year is the class that is going to be subject to third grade retention.
Well, our law really isn't say that.
Okay, help me out.
I think a lot of us thought that was didn't make any sense. That you're sort of punishing kids, and they tried it in Florida, and they thought that was a good example. It didn't really work in Florida anyway.
So do you think
So-
that is on the table? Is that third grade?
Well, the law says they have to go to summer school and some other things, so we softened it a little bit, so I don't know what's going to happen with that.
Okay.
So we need to look at that also.
And the governor came in with a pretty low number for the state supplemental aid in his budget.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about?
Right, which is what we used to call allowable growth. Now, both of those, people don't understand what that is. School districts in Iowa have budgets, what they call controlled budgets. They are controlled by the legislature, essentially. We control the amount per pupil that we give school districts, which is
1,600?
yeah, no, 6,500 something, 66. I may be off now. Anyway, and then we control setting how much they have to levy in property taxes also. So everything is controlled. They can't go out on their own and levy property taxes or anything else because it's all part of the formula.
And the purpose of that is so that you don't have property-rich districts
Right.
with great schools and property-poor districts
Right.
really struggling.
If you've seen in Texas or some other places where they ended up suing the state and it took them to court or whatever, where they had some really poor counties that the level of education there was not even close to what it was in Dallas or somewhere. So our system actually works. Our formula, I think, has been through court, and it really is kind of a fair formula where everyone gets a certain level of funding across the state. So the property poor districts do well. Actually, the formula doesn't benefit a property-rich district, for example, like Iowa City, where if they were allowed on their own, they could just levy property tax, and the levy wouldn't be much because the values are high, and it would help them, but the formula doesn't necessarily benefit them.
And the drawback is that it's out of their hands.
Right.
It's all in Des Moines.
Right, and I think you get a lot of people sort of demanding the school board should do something different, and that isn't their call. So, so because you have that, you need to do something with allowable growth. That's the increment of additional funding that we grant to the schools, and per pupil, and then we allow them to go on property tax also. And there's a complicated formula on how you do that. You have a first level of property tax that goes in, and then if that doesn't get to the right level, there's another one you can go in again and levy that. So it's at 4% right now for this fiscal year, and prior to that it was 2 plus 2, and I think before that it was 0. But unfortunately, because it was 0, and you could kind of see that over the last few years that Iowa City, for example, had to send out some slips to lay off teachers because of that, not knowing where the funding's going to be. So we need to do something that's a decent allowable growth level to make
Districts
sure
say
the
3
districts
to
are fine.
4% will help them hold steady.
Yeah, I think 3 or 4. I know some of the advocates have asked for 6%. I'd like to see us come up with 6%, but I don't think that's in the cards realistically with revenues. But I would hope we can look at 3 or 4%, and the governor recommended, he has $29 million in there, as far as we can tell. Now, he's moved a lot of money around, so it's hard to tell, but I think it's $29 million, and about 1% is about 35, so that's even less than 1%.
So what is the Democratic counteroffer going to be?
Well, I don't know at this point, but it certainly should be closer to the 3 or 4% and something we can live with that will make certain we do fund, and something that would help the school districts at least maintain where they're at. So.
Another school issue is the idea of the early start date waiver. So it is state law that schools cannot start in August. Almost every school district has gotten into the habit of doing so. Are legislators going to look at changing that law now that the State Department of Ed has said no more waivers, or you better show us a really strong case for a waiver?
Yeah, I'm not certain what the State Department has done now. I think they maybe automatically granted waivers before, and now they're actually looking at them. But I think in a lot of places, there are legitimate reasons why you would waive that. So I think there'll be a lot of discussion on that, and we really need to look at it. You know, there's a lot of districts. You take the Iowa City one, for example. For them to like start, not sort of follow the university of Iowa calendar makes no sense. And other places where you have something else like that also, it makes no sense. So that's why you have sort of individual start dates. So I would hope that that the start date is based on educational needs and not on something else. So.
Do you think it should be a local decision?
Yeah, it should, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get to that point or whatever. But there'll be a lot of discussion on that.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a red herring that we're out here discussing school start date and not allowable growth, which is really important. I mean, school start date is okay, but eventually that'll get worked out. But the important thing is that allowable growth, that the school district actually have the money. And allowable growth, they use it for teacher salaries and everything else. The money that goes into the teacher leadership programs, that's separate money and can't be used for those other things.
Districts also say that growth in their salary costs is out of their hands because of collective bargaining, that they can't not bargain, and so they can't not offer increases. And so, I mean, are there, at the same time, education is a huge part of the state budget. It's a very expensive endeavor. Are there other, you know, having gone through these lean years, all the easy efficiencies or even harder efficiencies that are maybe easier to come across have been done? Are there bigger efficiencies? Are there other ways that we can control the cost of education, or do we need to?
Well, I think you always try to be as efficient as you can, but I think we have some really good districts in Iowa. I think they've gotten some, because we haven't funded some things. There's all sorts of information on test scores and things, and it's almost correlation where when we didn't put in funding, the funding went this way, so did the test scores. So I think that's proven, and we're now, I think we're at 35th now.
In funding.
Yeah, in the state nationally, and we were 37th, so we need to keep. We should be at the national average, but we're not. So I would hope we'd look at that. We're something like $1,600 per pupil less than the national average. That's a lot.
The AEAs are floating a proposal to do some pilot programs for in-school mental health services. Have you had a chance to take a look at that?
I haven't looked at that very much, but I think that's certainly a need. I mean, students today have all sorts of situations they have to deal with, and it's a lot different than, I know you get a lot of parents or people say, well, when I went to school, you know, everything was fine and great, and it probably wasn't, but there are a lot of problems, mental health and all sorts of other things. Some kids go to school with no food, you know, I mean, that's another situation. There's all sorts of things we need to deal with. So.
Okay. Are there other education issues you expect to come up this session? I know the liability of schools is something that the Heart Association has brought up, making sure that schools are feeling comfortable sharing their facilities with the community and not worried about liability issues. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, it is the public's, you know, building. It really isn't just a school district, so it should be available to everyone. So I hope they can figure that out. I mean, otherwise, why have that? You know, I mean, it really is public building. So I think there'll be some work done in that area too.
Great.
So.
How about sledding?
Sledding, I don't know. I haven't looked too closely into all that yet. I guess I'm sure that's all going to come out during the session on what we're going to do about that. And it just seems odd, but anyway.
Okay. All right. Back to the bigger issues. Broadband access is something that I think everybody agrees is a great idea for our rural areas, but kind of disagreeing on how to get there exactly. Is this the year that we're going to have a broadband bill? What were some of the stumbling blocks to this in the first place, and are we going to be able to resolve them?
I would hope so. I mean, what is sort of sad is this has been an issue for years, all through the 20-plus years I've been in Des Moines. This has been an issue, and every so often they make a little effort to move forward. I see, President Obama was here in Cedar Falls. Cedar Falls is a public utility, and they did this great thing where they're only gigabit city or whatever in Iowa, that they really do all sorts of things there. So promoting, more broadband access. I was involved a little bit. I went to a couple meetings in the governor's office last year on the broadband issue. Nobody had a real good handle on it. I think what it turned out was they were just sort of going to give maybe extra tax breaks or whatever to some of these small companies, but there was no assurance that they would actually do anything with it. So, I mean, you actually have to hone in on saying you're going to provide this. And so I think they're looking at that sort of thing. And the other thing was this thing, another issue, this cell tower siting, which that's a big quagmire of how you do that and deal with that. And that was all thrown into the issue last year too. And all those things sort of combined, I think, to mess up. It actually failed in the House. So.
Okay. Do you think we'll have more clarity this year?
Well, I would hope so. And you got to make sure that whatever you do, if it's a tax credit or an actual grant or whatever, that they actually provide the services that you actually are enhancing.
Some accountability.
Broadband, yeah, and not just giving money to somebody. So.
Accountability has been a big theme.
Right.
And so is that are there legislative fixes that need to be done to make sure that we've got transparency in government and with these credits and arrangements and blue ribbon panels and the tentacles that kind of go outside of the State House and outside of the agencies?
Well, we have this public information board now that's out there, and they've heard a number of cases on transparency and public information. I think they have some recommendations on how to make that. I mean, the open meetings law has been in place for years and years and years, and you need to look at that, I think, and you need to look at all the other things that various governments do and how you can make that more transparent.
Governor Branstad has suggested a sort of one-stop shop for complaints. I can't remember what he called it.
Is it the public information?
It's something that the board would, that the board would administer. They may have some
website or something where they would, I think we need to do that too.
Okay.
I mean, I think when they got into it, they didn't understand how much more cases they'd have and situations they would have, a lot more than I think they anticipated. So.
And what about applying open meetings law to study commissions and
well, that's something I'll look at also, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if they affect the public business, you ought to really look at it. So.
Okay, great. Another thing that people have been asking is for counties to have more resources or more tools in their toolbox in order to fund big projects such as the courthouse that we're seeing in Johnson County. Is that something that legislators are interested in approaching?
They should be. A lot of times, cities and counties don't get a lot of very good fair shake in Des Moines. I guess unless you've served there, I serve in a Coralville City Council, so I try and look at local government, but a lot of legislators don't really do that. But I would hope our situation here in Johnson, in Johnson County with the jail and the need for more courtrooms, there's some ways to sort of look at that. I introduced for several years in a row trying to get rid of the 60% requirement to do that. It's the only 60% requirement in the code. And I'm not sure why that's not one person, one vote. I don't understand why somebody voting against it really has more than one vote essentially in that scenario. So, but it never went anywhere, so I haven't introduced that in a long time. But that's one way you could do is to change that. The other one that there hasn't been much discussion about this, and I'm not sure why, but there is a provision in Iowa law where if they go together, like in this case, this would be probably the city of Iowa City and Johnson County to build a facility, then it's just 50% approval needed.
Okay, so there already are some options.
Yeah, and they've done that in other places. I believe Scott County and some other smaller counties, I think Washington County and some other places, they've done that and it seems to be working. I'm not sure why we don't explore that here. Or you'd have a joint facility and that's set up to encourage those joint facilities. So
Great.
I think that'll be something looked into. And then also, if we do the transportation infrastructure, that will help counties also with more funding for roads, but that doesn't address their jail and courthouse things.
Okay.
So I think there is a big problem in not having enough courtrooms in Johnson County too. As I understand, we have, what, 4 right now or 3 courtrooms? It's pretty...
3.5, I think.
Yeah, something like that. And I understand Blackhawk County has like 13. And they have actually less cases than we do. So that's a big problem, and then obviously the overcrowding in the jail also. So
one of the reasons for our large jail population is mental health system and
Right.
a number of people falling through the cracks. Talk about the mental health redesign, where we're at this session in terms of how that redesign is going. Are there fixes that need to be done? How's the funding level? What's the status with all of that?
I think there always are going to be fixes that need to be done. It's a huge system, and trying to change it is a tough thing. I did get a chance to attend our local regional one where we have 8 counties, I believe it is, that are together working on the regional system here, and they seem to be really doing pretty well, moving forward on that. So I think that's good. I don't know if that's the case all across the state or not, but I think that's helpful. And I think the next fiscal year is when we go into the regional situation,
Okay.
I believe. I'm not totally sure. I don't think we have another year of funding for just county things. But anyway, I think things are moving forward. There's always going to be tweaks and that sort of thing.
So this year they're kind of setting up the infrastructure, and next year it'll be...
I think fiscal 16 is the first year we go on the regional system, but I'm not certain of that.
Okay.
I'd have to double check that.
Okay.
I don't think there's another year of that additional equalization of county funds or not.
Okay.
But I understand the governor, and like I said, he didn't really talk about this in his State of the State, but he has cut some of that funding, so we need to really look into that.
He's also suggested closing 2 of the state's mental health
Right.
institutions. Is that a good idea? Is this the time? Those are older institutions from a different
Yeah.
sort of philosophy of care. Is this the time to do that? And what's the right transition?
Different era. I think for years people have sort of had that in the background, that they need to look at those, as well as the Woodward and Glenwood, the other 2 facilities that are out there also. We need to go through that. I guess it's one of those things where if the governor wants to do that, I think I'm not sure if he could do it on his own. We'll find that out. I guess there's a suit right now on Toledo. But the effect of essentially, because he closed Toledo and everything's done now, once the court comes back, they'll say, well, maybe he didn't have authority, but he did it anyway. So I don't know if you can change what the governor's doing on that. But we need to look at it, and we need to make certain that those people are taken care of, and we also need to do it in the facilities. And we need to look at the state employees who work there too, and hopefully they don't lose their jobs because of that maybe they can transfer somewhere else or whatever. So I think we need to look at the whole system and see where we're at. But clearly, I mean, they're a lot smaller, and the huge facilities just don't have we just don't warehouse people like that anymore.
What other big issues are coming up this session? What are your personal priorities?
Well, the budget, obviously, it's it's going to be a tough budget because of those commitments we made, and because it's a tough budget, and then that filters down into every issue essentially. If you need more money for mental health, well, it's a tough budget. If you need to implement a new formula for regents, well, we don't necessarily have the backfill to do that. Whatever it might be, that will sort of change the tenure of the discussion on those issues. So everything's going to revolve around that somewhat. That we have to deal with that. The other sort of local situation we had here is President Sally Mason announced that she's retiring, I think August 1st.
That's right, yeah.
And that's be substantial change here. And I called for an open process, open, transparent process in the selection of a new president, and I would hope the regents would do that, and they would involve all the different entities, all the different people that make up the university, the faculty, the students, the staff, all that, and all the other ones, that we'd have a good open process. That would be very helpful.
It's a good reminder that university faculty and president's public position, just like yours,
right,
taxpayer funded and taxpayer accountable.
Yeah, President Mason was 8 years, and she really came in at a really tough time, and she got hit with the floods like a year into her presidency and had to deal with all that. The campus was inundated and had to rebuild that and do all those things. And then unfortunately, the drop in sort of support from the state over the last few years, that doesn't help. And then the region's sort of well, I'm not sure what all that is. Communication was a problem anyway, I think, and trying to deal with that. So she's really had a lot of things she had to deal with, and I think has done a really pretty good job of dealing with it and done a good job as president. One of the things I think you note that some of the hires she made, that is some people that really do a good job here. Vice President Tom Rockland for Vice President of Student Services, a great guy. The Provost, Barry Butler, very good guy. And I think this is under her tenure too. Also, they brought Vice President Robillard back, who'd worked here before in another capacity, Vice President for Health Affairs, and he's a national leader in those areas. So I think she's made some really good hiring decisions and done some really good things to move the state forward.
Great.
So,
well, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Sure.
So how should constituents get in touch with you if they have ideas or questions for you?
Well, the old-fashioned way is to call. You could get the number for the House and Senate on the legislature's website, or email, or come to Des Moines. And I'm kind of surprised how many people are in Des Moines from our area. There really are a lot of them. Actually, when we did the State of the Judiciary, they had a group from Johnson County who were there, and they were recognized. This is the juvenile justice group that are trying to deal with racial disparity in teenagers and in juvenile justice. And so Judge Minot and her group were there, and they were recognized. So there's always somebody from our area there. But you certainly can email. You can do the old-fashioned letter writing also, that's great, or a call or whatever.
All right, well, thank you very much for being here.
Sure, thank you.
And up next, we're going to talk with Representative Dave Jacoby on Coralville's Legislative Preview Show. Welcome back to Coral Vision's Legislative Preview Show. I'm here with Representative Dave Jacoby. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I noticed that you've got your Hawkeye shirt on. Obviously, one of the most breaking news items lately is the President Sally Mason's announcement that she will retire on August 1st. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'm very sad to see Sally leave. Obviously, she thought two things: that she has been as effective as she could be representing the University of Iowa, and quite honestly is probably tired of this current Board of Regents bullying her every step of the way. And she's been tremendously successful in spite of them being a roadblock for the success at the University of Iowa. I hope we have a diligent search for a new leader. And I also hope at the state level that it might be time for us to take a look at the structure of the Board of Regents and how they're appointed. In fact, what I'd like to see, and I will draft a bill next week, is that the Board of Regents is an elected body like we see the boards that run our community colleges. The boards of trustees are elected by district and are responsible to the people in that district.
So you think that the Regents had something to do with President Mason's decision?
Well, I never want to speak for someone else, but I certainly believe that they were a major factor in her decision to move on and to retire. Now, she has served 8 years here, served during one of the roughest times in the university history. The flood of 2008 was just devastating to the university as it was to Iowa City and Coralville. And she successfully led the university through reconstruction, and some of that is still going on right now in terms of the School of Music and, of course, Hampshire. So I think it was an 8 years that no one would have thought of when you come into a situation without knowing that there's going to be a huge flood, that there's other challenges you have academically, revenue streams. We have one of the top hospitals in the country, and of course our sports program. So there's a lot of things you have to deal with as a university president, and when you have to deal with a number of variables in an equation, it really helps if the Board of Regents is supportive instead of throwing roadblocks every step of the way.
So how would it work to have the Regents be an elected body?
Well, simply, you determine the number of regents that you want to serve on the board, and then by district, in Iowa, they would have elections in those districts on who
General?
would serve. A general election,
Okay.
on the general election ballot, and that would approve the people who would serve on the Board of Regents.
So you think the regents right now don't have any kind of public accountability or enough public accountability?
Well, I think they're only accountable to one person, and they're not being accountable to Iowans as a whole and to the regents on an individual basis. So I think the regents' funding module that they've laid out there for us is one that hurts one university more than the other two, and that would be our University of Iowa. But I also think it hurts the University of Northern Iowa, where I'm a proud graduate. Two brothers graduated from University of Northern Iowa. I have one brother that graduated from Iowa State, two nephews there at Iowa State right now, and my wife, both degrees from the University of Iowa. But their funding module or model would hurt all three. I think it hurts the university by that initial cut of 40 plus million, but it also hurts the University of Northern Iowa.
How so?
It sets up a competitive recruiting mechanism, which is good for the schools to be competitive with each other, but not cutthroat competitive for Iowa students. And also, in my opinion, this funding mechanism puts a road sign out on Interstate 80 and every other highway into Iowa saying, "You're not welcome here." We need to give priority to our Iowa students, but it doesn't mean shutting the door for students from other states that want to come to our universities.
So do you think the current funding mechanism is adequate? I mean, the current formula, do you think that's adequate?
Well, I think the current formula needs to be revisited, and I think there needs to be a performance-based model. But I don't think the one that they've proposed is by any means the route we should go. There's a number of different matrices you can look at for funding the universities, the regent schools, but this one is, out using inappropriate language, is kind of political baloney, targeting one university over the other two.
So what are next steps then? What do you think should be done?
Well, in the legislature this year, we will debate the current funding suggestion from the Board of Regents, and there is a bipartisan support to change that. I've heard from a couple friends that serve in the House that have come up to me saying, "I will work with you on that funding mechanism because it does not work, it is not fair, and it actually hurts us in Iowa by closing the door to students from out of state."
So would legislators come up with an alternative proposal, or would they just send it back to be redone?
Well, I think what we will do, we will work with the proposal that both the governor has laid out through the state speech earlier this week and what the regents have proposed. And I think it'll be a negotiation of those two models, but also to make it more fair to all three universities.
Do you hope to have an alternative then ready to be in place for the next fiscal year, or do you think it's going to
Yes.
take some? Okay.
Yes, we're hoping that that'll be effective for the next fiscal year.
Okay, great. Now you are in the minority in the House. Talk a little bit about how that is different than being in the majority. How is your role different? How is your work different?
Well, the role is still important. Honestly, it'd be more fun to be in the majority. But we work across the aisle quite a bit in the State House, a lot more than people see on the federal level. The difference is the party in the majority set the agenda, and then we work on that agenda together. When you're in the majority, you determine the agenda, whereas the minority party reacts to the agenda that's being set. But still, there's a number of things on the table that we're working together on. One of them is school start date.
Let's talk about the school start date.
Well, it's interesting that we decide to set a school start date based on the Iowa State Fair. And there's some false information out there. If any parent at any time wants their child to go to the state fair, they can always go to the state fair. The Jacoby family went to the state fair last year. It is a local decision.
Should be a local decision.
And that's where the frustration comes for me, is that, not that we didn't talk about it, not that there's a process involved, it's more so we have elected school board members to determine what start dates and end dates and vacation dates are important to them in their home area.
Do you think that legislators are going to remove that law from the books then?
Well, I think there's a strong push to do that. We're also waiting to hear more from local school boards and parents. Now, interesting enough, locally, the district I serve, House District 74, there's been about 40, 45 people who have contacted me and said, we don't like the school start date change. And others, admittedly, there are only a few, but now it's around 10 to a dozen who have called to say, we like a start date after September 1st. But we are a university-based region, and a lot of our scheduling is based on the university calendar, but also in our partnership with Kirkwood Community College and dual credit students, it's based on our calendar alongside Kirkwood's. So I think there's a lot of variables in the equation that weren't well thought out. And of course, the outlier is athletics. When do the students come to start practice? When are practices allowed by rule through the Iowa Athletic Association? So there's just a lot of things to work on. But many schools, districts, and many parents have said we can work with it, but we just don't like the state telling us what to do.
So if
in
we
our
decide
local
to go on
schools.
September 1st, that's our decision.
That would be our decision.
Okay.
Now, the governor and the Department of Education Director, Brad Buck, have said, you can still apply for waivers, but most likely those waivers will not be granted.
Let's talk about school funding. The governor unveiled his budget this last week with a minimal increase, a small increase in supplemental aid, what used to be called
Allowable growth.
I can't remember anything. I'm sorry. Allowable growth. Where do you think that the House is going to come in on a number? Where do you want to see this land, I guess?
Well, it's important to know the history for allowable growth, or now called supplemental aid. That is the main revenue stream for the K-12 public schools to operate from. And allowable growth or supplemental aid is a per pupil, per student allocation from the state that goes to each school district. It's roughly $6,500 per student. This is what schools survive on. This is what pays teacher salaries, administrative salaries, and also keeps the school running day to day. The history of the legislature over the last couple of years has been 0%. So there's been no growth in the amount of money given to the school districts. And school districts have struggled a little bit. I think now as we head into year 3, we have to look at least a minimum of 4% allowable growth or supplemental aid for our schools to remain viable. And it hurts both the schools with growing enrollment, like our schools in the corridor, and those schools that have declining enrollment that we're seeing in rural areas. This may be one of the 2 most important items that we deal with this year in the legislature.
And this is a struggle every year.
Every year.
Is there something that can be done? Because, I mean, it also should be said that education is a large portion of the state's budget. It's not like we don't spend money on education, but that education continues to get more expensive. So are there other alternatives, or are we just going to have to resolve ourselves to having this argument every single fall?
It is an argument every single year, and it's a little ironic that we changed the structure for reimbursement for the commercial property tax rollback, which is legislation we did 2 years ago. And we've guaranteed cities and counties that we will pay the difference from that commercial property tax rollback. In other words, personal income taxpayers are paying for the backfill for the commercial property tax, but we have guaranteed that backfill for 10 years. For some reason, we can't do the same for education. Every year, it's an annual discussion on what we should allocate to our K-12 system. If we can make a commitment to local governments and commercial businesses that we're going to backfill that loss of revenue, there's no reason we cannot make a longer-term commitment to our schools.
Are there other efficiencies are there more creative ways to make schools more efficient? Online learning, I know, staff is the overwhelming majority of what we're talking about here with the budget. Are there ways to make education more affordable on the K-12 level?
And we've looked at that. We're looking at online learning. We're looking at, technology moves so fast. The ICN, is the ICN something we can use, or is the ICN a dinosaur? Or how can we use technology to better connect classrooms? If you have someone who's a Calculus 3 teacher, but another school district doesn't have her, or a Calculus 3 teacher, why don't we look at ways that we could hook them up through FaceTime or other connective measures through technology? The problem is what we see right now is the smaller the class, the better they perform. And we keep moving away from the things we talk so much about. How can we streamline classrooms? How can we cut the budget? When you look at things that are straight down the road, smaller class sizes improve student performance. I mean, it's just flat out and out. It's proven itself over the years, whether it's kindergarten or a junior physics class, the smaller classroom. We need to look at the smaller classroom as a starting point for the discussion and then move backwards from there as far as the funding. But performance is so important now as we're measuring our students every year, and we're looking at STEM initiatives, science, technology, engineering, and math, and also including the arts. As we look at these initiatives and student performance, it doesn't always take money to improve it, but it does take adequate funding for the baseline when we look for partnership with business. And businesses have stepped up to help in the areas of STEM and the arts, but we need something that's steady every year, and the allowable growth and the supplemental aid is what provides school that steady funding stream year to year.
It's also important that the funding be properly applied. I've talked to some school officials who say that, for example, retention or dropout funding comes so late. It's designated for so late in the process that it's really not helping anybody. The kids are already uninvested in school, and especially now looking at the third grade retention rules coming into effect, they would like to see those funds applied K-3, where kids, when you can get a kid hooked into school, they say in kindergarten, first or second grade, then your dropout rates, decline over time because those kids are already invested. They're going to keep coming to school. That it's that early intervention that makes a difference. Are there fixes like that you'll all be looking at this session?
Well, and that's one of the major discussions we do have, and I will say debates, is how early is too early or too late to work with students in improving their academic position. All the studies have agreed that the earlier you can engage a student or a child, the better. And if you engage a student in reading, writing, and math in second grade, remediation over a longitudinal time results in better test scores than if you're trying to jump in at the junior level or sophomore level when the student has already checked out. So I think we need a universal plan to address how we want to get our students before that third grade test.
Right.
So they're prepared for reading and writing, and that first matrix that we're going to look at before you say, oh, the student's in trouble, even before third grade.
And that was the
preschool,
promise
and
with the
kindergarten.
retention, right? Was that there would be help.
There would be help on the other end of that. And that is something that we have not seen.
Okay.
So the schools are doing their best to meet the rule of the law, but they haven't had a whole lot of support to do that.
Is that coming this session?
I hope it is.
Okay.
I hope it is, both in terms of educators, but also school nurses. And school nurses that are trained in recognizing if there's other challenges that that student may have in terms of health reasons. And health reasons can be both physical and mental.
The AEA's floated a proposal that would fund pilots in all of their districts to have mental health professionals in school buildings to help address mental health needs. They estimate that anywhere between, I think, 5 and 12% of the student populations have some kind of undiagnosed mental health need, either from moderate to severe, and they'd like to put professionals in the building to deal with the more moderate cases and then to be a liaison to community partners for the more severe cases. Is that something that you think has a chance in this tight budget year?
Well, every year is a tight budget year, but I think it's so important that we have professionals in the school to recognize those children's and students' needs early. And we will always wrestle over the mental health system in Iowa. But these are students, these are children that need to perform at a certain level to be successful in life. And the earlier we can work with them, the better. The AEAs, a little to my surprise, the AEAs, who are statewide led by a former Republican Speaker of the House, came to us and said, these are our top 3 issues this year. We expected allowable growth to be one of the important issues, but they came to us and said, our number 1 issue in schools today is poverty, and a very close second is mental health challenges of our students. So that proposal that they want to have a professional within each school district to work with students early is one of the best proposals I've seen in years. But those things cost money. They are an investment for our local school districts. So we have to take a look at that and say, is this important or not? I truly think it's one of the more important issues that we'll deal with in the next 5 years.
Another critical issue that's been around for a long time is transportation infrastructure. Now, as ranking member on the Transportation Committee, you're going to have a lot to do this session. Can you talk a little bit about what early conversations have been? You know, there's a lot of buzz in the community about getting that gas tax raised or somehow funding our road system. Is there the political will? Is it going to get done?
Well, I think there is some political will this year to address the shortage on our infrastructure needs, specifically roads and bridges. The most common one we talk about is the gas tax, and there's some alternate proposals being floated out there. The governor threw out there each county could have a sales tax referendum. The positive thing about that is at least it brings it to the voters for them to decide. The negative part is if Cedar County doesn't approve it and Johnson County does that mean Interstate 80 is improved up until it reaches Cedar County? Or other connecting roads, or other state highways or county roads. So it doesn't leave it open for a congruous road system. The gas tax proposal, without getting into too many details, that we've seen the most is raise the price of gas 10 cents a gallon. Now there's 2 challenges that I have with that. One of them is, are we talking about everyone, agriculture, urban, rural, everyone pays that 10 cents? And the flip side is, in Johnson County, and I was just looking at these numbers this morning, if the gas tax were to be raised 10 cents per gallon, Johnson County would generate approximately $17 million that would go to the state road use fund. Out of that $17 million, $6.9 million would come back to Johnson County. So what we're looking at is over 50% of the dollars generated here would go across the state for road improvement, while less than 50% would stay local for the roads that need so much attention here.
So is that also going to be on the table? Is that formula, that's a whole nother can
Well,
of worms.
Jeff Elgin, former state lawmaker, Republican from Cedar Rapids, and an Iowa graduate, and I worked on the road use tax formula for a number of years in the House, and we could not gain any traction, if you'll pardon the pun, any traction on that bill to distribute the monies in a different way. I've been told that if that issue comes up, that it will probably kill any discussion on meeting the road use tax needs through a gas tax. But I also have to stand firm and say, well, I represent Johnson County, and I want to hear from all our friends and neighbors in Johnson County, what do you think? And I just posted on Facebook earlier today, if a gas tax were to be raised, this is how many of the dollars go to serve other areas. Is that fair to us? And we have much more than $7 million in needs for our roads and bridges in Johnson County. In fact, just the bridge out at the Coralville Res itself costs $7 million.
So what other options are there besides a gas tax, besides registration fees? I mean, what else are you going to?
Well, registration fees have been discussed. I don't think that will go anywhere. Another discussion which is interesting is taxing hybrid models or your lighter vehicles or your vehicles that use less gas more. That seems counterproductive if someone is buying a lighter car or more conservation-minded car that uses less gas or electric energy. Is that fair to them? And there will be the age-old argument. It was brought up at a forum before that just because my car weighs more, should I have to pay more? And then a discussion that usually is avoided because agriculture pays a little less if you have a truck or your dual axle vehicles. For the business of agriculture, they're taxed less and their gas is less. So is that fair to city dwellers or others that are paying a full taxation rate?
So how are you reaching out to other legislators to try and figure out where the common ground is on all of this?
Well, the common ground is I don't think there's a single person in the body that says we don't need to do something about our infrastructure. So that's good, because you don't see that on every issue that comes through both the House and Senate. I think it really falls into the weeds once we start discussing how to correct it, how to make it work. And as I've talked to many legislators, the baseline I use is, when's the last time you've had to have the alignment fixed, adjusted on your vehicle?
Right.
And it's interesting, almost every single person has said, I've had the alignment done on my car, my spouse's car, the kid's car within the last 6 months. So it's just tough. You have a number of people who have signed a pledge not to raise any taxes, regardless of the need. You have some people who think that there's enough money in the general fund budget to make an allocation of up to $200 million for roads and bridges. And there's some who say there's not enough wiggle room in the budget. The gas tax or another form is the only way to go.
So are we going to get it done this year?
I think we'll get something done this year.
Talk a little bit about broadband. That's another thing that you're involved with. There have been proposals in the past to expand broadband to our rural areas, but there have been some sticking points. Can you describe what those sticking points were and how you think they're going to play out this session?
Well, the sticking points, the sticking point, which is common to our rural areas and also our underserved areas in urban areas, is cost. The cost to put wire in the ground or the cost to build a tower is significant. And many companies feel like they cannot make it back within a 10-year time frame or even 15 years. So the struggle is to get the wire out to the rural areas, and it's a little different. It's a little different formula when you have dense population and people that can afford high-speed internet, as opposed to a farm lane where there's one or two people that may use that high-speed internet. But for Iowa to be truly competitive, we need high-speed internet access to every Iowan.
Are we at the point yet where broadband is a public utility, or should it be?
Well, I believe a number of the municipal companies, a number of the larger companies, CenturyLink, Mediacom, would disagree with that. I think the answer, or my question to them to reach the answer, is then how can you participate and help with that outreach? We happen to have a very strong local company who made that outreach to rural areas. They realize that the payback will take years and years, but they've invested their time and money in outreach and laying wire to fiber out to the underserved areas. It is a matter of money, but it's also a matter of moving Iowa forward. It's not just for leisure, it's for business development in the rural areas.
What other kinds of new ideas are you seeing, or do you have personally, about economic development, about bringing Iowa forward? We've got sort of an increasing rural-urban divide here. I mean, how do we bring everybody back to, or do we need to bring everybody back to the same level as far as competitiveness economically?
Well, I think the only way Iowa can be and remain truly competitive is if everyone in the state is participating. And so we can't just say all the activity is here in our creative corridor, and there is quite a bit of activity in our creative corridor, but we have to also let the rural, or help the rural area become competitive and be involved in this development of business in terms of individual in your garage started businesses. I mean, we always want to hit the home run and bring Google in and Microsoft, but we all know that where the true business development is when people start it in their basement and start it in their garage. In the rural areas, you can't do that anymore unless you have that high-speed internet access. One of the things I'm really excited about is the STEM initiative, what we're doing through the university and Kirkwood Community College, the opening this coming August of the regional center out on the Oakdale campus, which will initiate several STEM programs, and that outreach is to reach all the students. Our higher performing students, our students in the middle who are doing okay in class, but might not know what they're going to do after graduation, and then our third of the students who are struggling a bit, a little socially, a little academically, but all three of those thirds can be active out at the regional center and learning a new future in terms of STEM. And it doesn't have to be that everyone's a chemical engineer. It could be someone who's interested in 6 months or 1 year training in wastewater treatment or engineering tech or first level of lab tech. One of the partners is the hygienic lab. So there's a whole menu of opportunities for our students, and I'm very excited about those opportunities.
The governor announced a new private-public partnership to help address that workforce gap. Have you had any chance to look at the details of that? Does that look like it's something that's going to be useful?
Well, I think it's something that's going to be useful, but I think it's time that we move beyond the rhetoric behind it, because we've talked about those partnerships for years, and we have a number of those partnerships in the corridor. What we have to look at is two things: involving more business members and making that movement sustainable. Because the business partners we're working with right now, they're very invested, like the STEM program. The problem is we keep going back to the same well too often, asking them, can we get you involved in another initiative? and you've been great about training the workforce. Can we send you more employees? What we need to do is make it more universal in the business sector, and our business members have been willing to step up. We just don't want to burn out the business members who've been so good up to this date helping out.
Speaking of asking business for a helping hand, shelter workshops are being phased out over the next couple of years locally, and the local advocates are hoping that businesses will step up to help employees with significant disabilities to work in an integrated setting. There's a tax credit right now for small businesses who do that, but the definition of small business is something like a couple of dozen of employees.
Yes.
And there's a proposal to boost that to a few hundred or possibly 500 employees, which really fits more of what our small business community looks like. Is that something, but again, comes with a price tag. Is that something that you think can get done this session, or is that something that's going to have to go?
Well, it does come with a price tag, but it's a pretty important price tag. And that's just an initiative to help employers or businesses give a tryout, kind of a tryout employment for people who may have other challenges. And what they usually find is that they make great employees, and they do so well with the rest of the workforce that it's very constructive and productive for those businesses. So I think that's a tax credit that's a good investment. And I think, again, there's so many jobs that are open in Iowa left unfilled that this is a great applicant labor pool that fits in well with everyone.
Great. What other personal or party priorities do you have that we haven't touched on yet today?
Well, I just want us to move forward with the STEM initiative, and I just want us to actually in Iowa maintain that working together motive that we have there. We go in there, it's not like Washington, D.C. at all, and I know people always say that in October or, before elections, oh, we're great friends, but it is true at the state level. We're good friends, we work together. It doesn't hurt to strap on the wrestling shoes once in a while and have a good match, as long as you shake hands before and you shake hands after. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make sure that as legislators we continue to work together, and by far the most important thing is to hear from people.
And how do people get in touch with you?
Well, email is always a good way. And it's interesting, email now, when I started 10 years ago, the rule was to get back to someone who sent you an email within 3 days. And now I try to get back to every person who emails me within 6 to 8 hours. But technology is different. Mm-hmm. Someone will send you an email and say, I sent you an email 20 minutes ago and you haven't got back to me. But email your legislators. Please email me. Telephone. Always willing to talk one-on-one, make sure I understand what the issue is. And snail mail, paper works too. Facebook, whatever social media avenue you might want to use. But the most important thing is to tell me what's important to you.
All right, well, thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you so much, and good seeing you again, Jennifer.
Good seeing you.